Have you ever wondered why you still think in your native language, even after years of English practice? Hi, my name is Melania. I want to tell you about my journey, how I finally stopped translating everything in my head and started thinking in English. For a long time, English felt like a puzzle I had to solve word by word. But now, it just flows, and I want to show you how I did it. For a long time, I believed I was doing the right thing. Every time someone spoke to me in English, I would instantly go into translation mode. It was like this switch flipped in my brain. Listen in English, translate into my native language. Think of the reply in my native language, then translate it back into English. Only then would I speak. It seemed logical, safe even. I thought this method would help me avoid mistakes, give me time to make sure my grammar was correct, and help me sound more fluent. But what it really did was hold me back, and it took me years to realize that. The first time I noticed this problem was during a job interview at a small design firm just outside of Chicago. I had prepared for days, memorizing my answers in both languages. I knew what I wanted to say, but when the interviewer asked, "Tell me about a time you solved a problem at work," my mind blanked. Not because I didn't have a story, but because I was busy translating the question in my head, then trying to remember the version of my answer I'd practiced in English. I stumbled through it, pausing too long between sentences, losing eye contact, getting flustered. The interviewer smiled politely, but I could tell I'd lost them. I didn't get the job, and deep down, I knew it wasn't because I lacked experience. It was because I couldn't respond naturally. I was too caught up in my inner translation process to actually connect with the person in front of me. This pattern kept repeating. Whether I was ordering food at a cafe, answering the phone at work, or just chatting with neighbors, I always felt like I was playing catch-up. I'd smile and nod when people talked, pretending to understand when I didn't, just to buy myself time. I'd go home exhausted, not from the conversation, but from the mental gymnastics I had to perform every time someone said something to me. And the worst part was, I didn't feel like myself. I sounded robotic. My real personality, the one who made jokes, asked deep questions, and loved telling stories, was buried under layers of hesitation. I remember one afternoon, I was sitting in my car after grocery shopping. A cashier had tried to make small talk, something about the weather, and I just mumbled a short answer, hoping to avoid any follow-up. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt frustrated. "You live in America now," I whispered. "You speak English every day. Why is this still so hard?" And that's when it hit me. I wasn't speaking English. I was translating English. There's a big difference. And that difference was slowing me down, draining my energy, and keeping me stuck. So I started paying closer attention to when I translated in my head. I noticed it happened most when I was nervous or wanted to sound smart, like during work meetings. My job at the time was in retail management. Every Monday, we had a morning meeting where we discussed sales goals, store issues, and customer complaints. And every week, I dreaded being called on. I'd sit there, heart pounding, trying to prepare sentences in advance. If someone asked me a direct question, I'd panic. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I had to take the long route in my mind to say it in English. And during that pause, someone else would speak up and the moment would pass. I realized translation was like having a middleman in my head. And this middleman was slow, awkward, and always second-guessing me. I didn't need him anymore. I wanted to think and speak directly in English, the way I had learned to drive without thinking about every move. At first, I thought maybe I just needed more vocabulary. But that wasn't it. I knew plenty of words. I just wasn't using them because I was still stuck in my old habit of thinking in my first language first. The real turning point came during a conversation with my coworker, Amanda. She was friendly, always upbeat, and never seemed to judge my English. One afternoon during our lunch break, she asked, "Melania, do you ever dream in English?" I laughed and said, "No, not yet. I still dream in my own language." She smiled and replied, "Well, maybe that's when you'll know it's really become part of you." That stuck with me. I went home that night and lay in bed thinking about her words. What would it take for me to dream in English? For English to become part of how I saw the world, not just something I used, but something I lived? I decided to test myself. For one full day, I tried not to translate anything in my head. Instead, I forced myself to describe things around me, using only English, even if the sentences were simple or broken. While walking through my neighborhood, I said things like, "That's a red car. The sky is cloudy. I feel cold." At first, it felt childish, but then I noticed something surprising. My brain wasn't as tired. Without the back and forth translation, I was thinking faster, responding quicker, and feeling less pressure to be perfect. That evening, I watched a video on YouTube about how kids learn language. The speaker said something that changed my whole outlook. Kids don't translate. They connect the word to the object or feeling directly. That's what I needed to do. Build a direct connection between English words and the real world, not through my first language, but through experience, repetition, and trust. The next few weeks, I focused on this new approach. I started small, labeling things in my house in English: door, chair, window, spoon. I carried a small notebook and jotted down sentences I heard people say, especially casual ones like, "I'm good," or "No worries." I didn't just want to learn English, I wanted to feel it. But it wasn't always smooth. Sometimes I slipped back into my old habit, especially when I was tired or stressed. One Saturday, I was standing in line at a coffee shop. A man behind me dropped his wallet and I bent down to help. He smiled and said, "Thanks, that was kind of you." My brain froze. I knew what kind meant, but I still translated it to my first language before replying, "You're welcome." And I could feel the delay. It bothered me. Later that night, I wrote about it in my journal, still translating, still scared to just respond. That journal became part of my practice, a way to track my progress, celebrate the small wins, and notice the moments when I defaulted to translation. I also started using voice memos on my phone to talk about my day in English. Just 5 minutes a night. At first, it was awkward listening to myself, but over time, I noticed a shift. My sentences got longer, my tone sounded more natural. I was thinking in English without even realizing it. And more importantly, I was starting to enjoy it. One morning during our team meeting, my manager asked, "Melania, do you have any updates on the store layout?" Normally, I would have panicked, paused, and let someone else speak. But this time, I smiled and answered right away. Not perfect English, but clear, confident, and direct. Everyone nodded. No one waited awkwardly. No one corrected me. I was part of the conversation, and I did it without translating a single word. It felt like flying. That moment gave me a new kind of motivation. If I could do that once, I could do it again. I knew I still had a lot of work ahead, but I also knew this. I had found the problem. Translation was my crutch, and I was ready to walk without it. From that point forward, I made it my mission to stop relying on mental translation. I wanted to build my thoughts in English, live my days in English, and maybe one day, even dream in English. But to do that, I had to do more than just avoid translation. I had to replace it with real practice. That meant training my brain to use English as my default, even for the small things in daily life. And so the next step in my journey began after that moment in the store meeting when I finally answered without translating. Something shifted in me. I felt a kind of freedom I hadn't felt before, a weight off my shoulders. It was like for the first time I wasn't just trying to survive in English, I was actually starting to live in it. But I knew that one victory wasn't enough. It was a beginning. I had to build on that momentum, keep pushing forward. And I realized that if I wanted English to feel natural, like second nature, I had to start thinking in it, not just speaking it when needed. That's when the idea hit me. What if I used English for my daily thoughts? At first, it sounded strange. My thoughts were the most private part of me. They were raw, fast, emotional, unfiltered. And they always came in my first language. Of course they did. It's the language of my memories, my childhood, my deepest feelings. But if I kept letting my native tongue dominate my mind, then English would always be a second language. Always something I had to switch into, never something I lived inside of. So I made a commitment. I told myself that from that day forward, I would try, really try, to use English in my thoughts. Not just when I was reading or writing or talking to someone, but all the time. In those quiet moments, brushing my teeth, driving to work, cooking dinner, folding laundry, I'd think in English. No one had to hear me. No one had to correct me. It was just me and my mind, practicing in silence. That first morning was tough. I woke up and usually I would stretch and think, I don't want to get up yet, I'm still sleepy. But I paused and tried to say it in English instead. I don't want to wake up. I feel tired. It felt clunky, robotic, but I said it anyway. Then I looked around my room and tried to describe what I saw. My phone is on the nightstand, the blanket is warm, I can hear a car outside. It felt like I was narrating my own life like a voiceover in a movie. But that's exactly what I needed, to connect English with the world around me, not just with textbooks or lessons. I took this practice with me everywhere. In the shower. The water is hot. I like this shampoo. I need to buy more soap. On my walk to the bus stop. The sky is cloudy today. That house has a red door. I forgot my umbrella. It sounds simple, I know. But that's what made it powerful. These were my real thoughts, not sentences from a language class. And by putting them into English, I was training my brain to make English the default. No more translating, just thinking, reacting, describing in real time. I also started talking to myself out loud when I was alone. At first, it felt a little crazy. Like, was I going to become one of those people who mumbles to themselves in public? But I found ways to do it privately. In the car, I'd narrate my drive. I'm turning left at the light. There's traffic on Main Street. I hope I'm not late. In the kitchen, I'd talk myself through recipes. First, I'll chop the onions, then I'll heat the pan. Don't forget the salt. It was like having a conversation with myself, except in a language I was still learning. And over time, I noticed something amazing. Those words started coming faster. I didn't have to stop and think, how do I say this in English? They just came. One night I was doing laundry, folding clothes while watching a TV show in the background. And I caught myself thinking, I should hang this shirt so it doesn't wrinkle. It was such a simple thought, but it came in English. I hadn't forced it. It was natural. That was the moment I knew it was working. I also started journaling in English. Every night before bed, I'd write a few sentences about my day. Nothing complicated, just honest reflections. Today was hard. I felt nervous during the meeting. but I spoke up and it went okay. Or, I missed my family today. I looked at old photos. I wish they lived closer. Writing like this helped me express real emotions in English, not just surface level stuff. It connected the language to my heart, not just my brain. Sometimes I didn't know how to say something, and that frustrated me. Like one day I was trying to think about a situation where I felt overwhelmed, but I couldn't remember the word. I felt stuck. But instead of switching to my native language, I described the feeling. I have too much to do. I don't know where to start. It's too much. Later that night, I looked up the word I had been missing, and when I saw it, I smiled. Overwhelmed. Yes, that was it. That was the word. And now it meant something personal to me. I wouldn't forget it. I started keeping a list of those missing words in my notebook. Not like a school list of vocabulary, but words that mattered to me because I had felt them but couldn't express them. Words like awkward, hopeful, stubborn, grateful. I'd hear them in a podcast or read them in an article, and I'd write them down. Not just their definition, but a sentence using my life. I felt awkward when I didn't understand the joke. I'm hopeful that I'll get better at this. My sister is very stubborn. These words weren't just part of English. They were part of me. At work, I started noticing a difference too. I worked at a retail clothing store in the mall, and we had to help customers on the floor answer questions and check people out at the register. Before, I used to rehearse things in my head before saying them. I'd think, okay, how do I say we're out of that size? And try to remember the right words. But now I was reacting more naturally. When someone said, do you have this in a medium? I could answer right away, let me check in the back for you. No hesitation, no translation, just me, speaking like myself. And when I made small mistakes, and I still made plenty, I didn't freeze. I didn't panic. I didn't go silent. I just laughed it off or fixed it. One time I told a customer, you can pay by card or cash, whatever is easy for you. She smiled and said, that's perfect. Thanks. That little moment gave me so much confidence. It reminded me that people care more about communication than grammar. They care about connection. One of my favorite tools became a voice memo app. Every day, on my walk to work or during lunch, I'd record myself talking about something. Maybe my plans for the weekend, something that happened that morning, or just how I was feeling. Then I'd play it back later and listen, not to judge, but to notice what sounded smooth and what didn't. I treated it like training, the way athletes watch game footage to improve. Over time, I could actually hear my improvement. My voice sounded more relaxed. My pauses were shorter. I was expressing real thoughts without stopping to find the words. Another thing that helped was music. I started listening to American pop songs and tried to sing along, even if I didn't catch every word. Then I'd look up the lyrics and read them out loud. Sometimes I'd even rewrite the song in my own words, keeping the same meaning but using language I would naturally use. It was fun, creative, and most importantly, it helped me feel the rhythm of English. It wasn't just about words, it was about flow. I also changed my phone to English. My apps, my settings, my GPS, all of it. That way, every time I checked the weather or looked at my calendar, I was practicing. I started following American YouTubers and influencers, especially ones who spoke clearly and talked about everyday stuff, like cleaning routines, cooking, fashion, or lifestyle tips. That kind of content felt relatable and gave me the language for real life, not just textbook phrases. After a few months, I noticed I didn't dread English anymore. It wasn't this hard thing I had to wrestle with. It was just part of my day. And the more I used it in my thoughts, the easier it became to use it out loud. I wasn't perfect, but I didn't need to be. I just needed to live in English. And you know what? One night, it finally happened. I had a dream. A short, silly dream, but it was in English. I was at a bakery asking for a cinnamon roll. I woke up smiling. It felt like a sign that my brain was starting to accept English as part of me, not something separate. That moment gave me even more energy to keep going. I was starting to think in English, speak in English, even dream in English. And I didn't get there by memorizing lists or studying grammar rules. I got there by practicing every day in real life with real thoughts. But there was still more work to do. If I really wanted to make English feel natural, I had to go one step further. I had to learn to listen, understand, and speak in real time, just like native speakers do. No subtitles, no translation, no pausing. That's when I discovered the next piece of the puzzle. By the time I started dreaming in English, something had definitely changed. It wasn't just a random experience. I felt different, lighter, braver, like my mind had opened a new door, and now I could walk through it without hesitation. But I also knew I still had work to do. Even though I had started thinking in English and talking to myself regularly, I still struggled in conversations with other people, especially fast ones. Native speakers talk quickly and they don't wait for you to catch up. They use slang, change topics mid-sentence, and use contractions like gonna or lemme or what did you, all of which felt like speed bumps in my listening. So I asked myself, how can I train my ears to understand real everyday English, not just slow classroom English? I needed something that would help me hear how people really talk in the US, at work, on the street, in coffee shops, with friends. That's when I turned to TV. I had always loved watching American shows. Growing up, I'd watched reruns of sitcoms with subtitles in my native language. I liked the characters, the stories, the humor. But I was always focused on reading the translation, not listening to the actual English. The actors' voices were just background noise. I thought I was learning English, but really, I was just following a story in my own language. Now, things were different. I had made it my goal to stop translating in my head, and subtitles were just another way of translating. So I made a big decision. I was going to watch my favorite shows again, but this time in English only. No subtitles, just raw listening. I started with something light and easy. Friends, a classic. Everyone knows it. The conversations are casual and the topics are simple. Relationships, jobs, daily life. At first, it was hard. I mean, really hard. I could catch a few words here and there. Coffee, job, date, funny, but I missed a lot of the jokes. I kept wanting to rewind and turn on the subtitles, but I told myself no. The whole point was to train my brain, not spoon-feed it. So I took notes instead. Every time I heard a phrase I didn't understand but kept hearing it repeated, I wrote it down phonetically. One of the first phrases I noticed was, "You know what I mean?" But the character said it fast. "You know what I mean?" I had to listen several times to catch it. Then I looked it up and suddenly it made sense. It was like unlocking a secret code. I began watching one episode every evening after work, not for entertainment, but as a listening workout. I listened closely to the rhythm of how people spoke, the way their voices went up when asking a question, how they used like and literally in ways that didn't always match the dictionary meaning. I started recognizing sentence patterns that people use to soften a message, like "I'm not sure, but," or "maybe we could," or "don't take this the wrong way, but." These were real-life tools, not grammar rules, and I was finally hearing them clearly. About 2 weeks in, I noticed something strange. I was beginning to predict what the characters would say next. It wasn't because I remembered the plot. It was because the phrases were becoming familiar. It was like my brain was collecting little audio files of real speech and storing them for later. That's when I decided to try something new, something bold. I started shadowing. I had heard the term from a language coach on YouTube. Shadowing means repeating what someone says, almost at the same time they say it, like an echo. It's not about memorizing or copying. It's about mimicking their tone, rhythm, and pace. You become their shadow. The first time I tried it, I felt ridiculous. I picked a scene from The Office, another favorite of mine, and I pressed play. Pam was talking to Jim about a prank he played on Dwight, and their conversation was fast and playful. I paused after every line and repeated what they said, trying to match the tone. That was so mean. You told him it was Friday? He believed you? My voice sounded stiff. I couldn't keep up, but I kept going. At first, I had to pause constantly. Then I moved to playing 10 seconds at a time, shadowing along. Eventually, I tried to repeat without pausing at all. It was hard. My mouth tripped over the words, but something amazing started happening. I was speaking in real American English patterns, not textbook English, real talk. I began to feel the rhythm of the language in my body. My intonation started changing. I didn't sound robotic anymore. I started linking words together, just like native speakers do. What are you doing became, what you doing? I don't know became, I don't know. These weren't grammar mistakes. They were real-life speech. And the more I shadowed, the more natural it felt. I remember one night after a shadowing session, I went to get takeout at a local burger place. The guy at the register asked, "What can I get ya?" Normally, I would have asked him to repeat that, but this time I recognized it instantly. Getcha, get you. I smiled and answered, "Can I get the double bacon with fries?" It was a small thing, but it made me feel like I belonged, like I wasn't just visiting the language, I was part of it. I started using shadowing as part of my daily routine. In the morning while getting dressed, I'd play scenes from shows and repeat them in the mirror. During lunch breaks, I'd watch short clips on my phone with my earbuds in and shadow quietly. At night, I'd put on my favorite sitcoms and speak along with the actors like I was part of the cast. Sometimes I'd laugh at myself. Sometimes I'd mess up, but I never stopped. And guess what? My speaking speed improved. I no longer paused in the middle of sentences looking for words. The phrases came out naturally. They were already stored in my brain like audio templates. I didn't have to build every sentence. I could just say it. One of the most powerful things about shadowing is that it teaches your brain and mouth to work together. When you only read or listen, your brain gets stronger, but your mouth stays behind. When you only speak without listening, your sentences sound unnatural. But when you shadow, you're training both at the same time. Listening, speaking, correcting, repeating, all at once. I started combining my shadowing practice with other tools. For example, I'd watch a scene and then rewrite the whole thing in my own words, then act it out. Sometimes I recorded myself and compared it to the original. Not to be critical, but to get better. And little by little, I started sounding more fluent. Not perfect, but real. I remember once at work, one of my coworkers, Tyler, said, "Your English has really improved. You sound different." I asked him what he meant. He said, "I don't know. You just sound more American now, like you're not thinking about it so much." That meant everything to me. Not because I wanted to sound American, but because it meant I was finally blending in, not as an outsider struggling with words, but as someone participating fully in life here. There was one moment that really made me realize how far I'd come. It was during a phone call with a customer who was upset about a return. Usually, phone calls terrified me. No facial expressions, no hand gestures, just pure listening and talking. But this time I handled the whole thing smoothly. I listened to her concerns, explained our store policy, apologized sincerely, and even made a little joke at the end that made her laugh. When I hung up, I sat there stunned. I hadn't translated a single word. I'd just spoken, and I'd been understood. That night, I reflected on everything that had gotten me to this point. The quiet journaling, the inner thoughts in English, the daily shadowing practice. It all came together, and I realized something. Fluency doesn't come from studying harder. After that team dinner, where I jumped into conversations without waiting for the perfect moment, I walked home through the quiet streets of Chicago, the cool night breeze brushing my cheeks. I felt more alive than I had in years. Not because I'd said anything extraordinary, but because I'd spoken freely, without filtering, and I had felt understood. That feeling of belonging, of being part of the noise and the laughter, was like stepping into a new version of myself, one that didn't hesitate, one that didn't translate, one that trusted her voice, even when it cracked or fumbled or didn't come out perfectly. That night, I stood in my small kitchen pouring a glass of water, and I whispered something to myself without even thinking. English is no longer a subject. It's my life now. The realization hit me hard. For the longest time, I had treated English like a test. I had viewed it as something outside of myself, a skill I needed to master, a thing I had to pass or fail. But now, something had shifted. English was no longer something I practiced. It was something I lived. And from that moment on, I decided I would stop separating learning English from my real world. I would stop waiting for special study time or the right conditions. Instead, I would build my entire life in English. One moment, one habit, one small change at a time. The first thing I did was simple. I changed the language on my phone. That one switch made a huge difference. Suddenly, everything I tapped, swiped, or read, emails, messages, reminders, notifications, was in English. I was seeing it dozens of times a day. I didn't realize how often I had been slipping back into my native language just by unlocking my screen. Now I was constantly surrounded by English, even in the smallest daily moments. Next, I turned to my apartment. I made English the language of my space. I labeled things with sticky notes: mirror, refrigerator, cabinet, toothpaste, not because I didn't know the words, but because I wanted to think of them instantly, automatically. I changed the settings on my smart speaker to English and started asking it questions out loud. What's the weather today? How do you say generous in a sentence? Play a podcast about American history? My living room started to sound like a learning lab, but it was also my home, and that mattered. Then I looked at my routines. I used to listen to music or the news in my native language in the morning, especially when I missed home, but I realized I was wasting valuable input time. So I made a new rule. Mornings belong to English. I found an American podcast hosted by two funny women talking about everyday life, work, relationships, health, random pop culture stuff. Their conversations were fast and full of slang, but I loved it. I didn't understand every word at first, but I caught the vibe, the energy, the rhythm. After a few weeks, I started catching more jokes. I started thinking in their phrases. They weren't just podcast hosts. They became my unofficial language coaches. I also subscribed to a YouTube channel run by an American teacher who explained grammar in a friendly, down-to-earth way. But more than grammar, she shared how Americans really speak, how they shorten words, how tone changes meaning, how body language matches speech. I watched one video every night before bed, and I took notes. Not on grammar rules, but on how things sounded. I'd repeat phrases out loud. I'd say them while brushing my teeth or folding laundry. They started sticking in my head. And then came books. I had always loved reading, but I had avoided novels in English because I thought they were too advanced. But one day at the public library, I saw a copy of The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I'd seen the movie before, so I knew the storyline. I checked it out thinking, why not? Reading it was slow at first. I underlined words I didn't know, looked up a few things, but mostly I just kept going. I didn't try to understand every single word. I read for meaning, for emotion, for rhythm. And by the end of the book, I had cried twice. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. That's when I realized I wasn't just reading English, I was feeling it. I started visiting the library every week. I picked books that were written for teens, or memoirs by American authors, or self-help books with short chapters. I kept a notebook where I wrote down new phrases, not just the definition, but an example sentence I created. That way I made the words mine. My English world expanded beyond my apartment too. I joined an English-speaking book club at the local library. I was terrified at first. What if they asked me to speak? What if I misunderstood a question? But everyone was so kind. They didn't care about my accent. They just cared that I showed up, that I read the book, that I shared my thoughts. Every time I raised my hand and said, I think the author meant, I felt my confidence grow stronger. But it wasn't just about structured settings. I also started making small talk in everyday life. At the bus stop, I'd ask someone if the bus was late. At the grocery store, I'd compliment someone's tote bag. In a cafe, I'd ask the barista what drink they recommended. Not every conversation was deep. Sometimes it was just a smile and a have a great day. But every word was part of my growing English universe. My social media also became part of the world I was building. I started following American comedians, motivational speakers, small-town vloggers, even food bloggers. I left comments in English. I read other people's replies. I joined a Facebook group for women learning English in the US, and we shared voice messages and advice. It felt like a community, like a home built entirely in my second language. One of the most powerful things I did was create what I called English-only hours. For 1 hour each evening, I turned off all distractions, put my phone on silent, and lived entirely in English. I read, I wrote, I talked to myself, I watched something without subtitles. I narrated my actions. It didn't matter what I did, as long as it was in English. That daily hour was like a mini immersion program right in my own apartment. Over time, 1 hour turned into 2, then sometimes 3. I even began dreaming in English. Not every night, but often enough that I noticed. And when I woke up and remembered a phrase from the dream, I'd write it down. One morning, I woke up laughing because in my dream, someone had said, "Don't cry over spilled coffee, girl." It made no sense, but it felt so American. So me. Eventually, English became the language of my thoughts. When I got good news, I reacted in English. "Oh my gosh, that's amazing." When I was upset, I'd say, "This sucks." When I felt proud, I'd whisper, "You did it, Melania. You really did it. I didn't have to try." English just flowed. Of course, it wasn't perfect. There were days I was tired, days when I missed home and just wanted to be surrounded by my native language. And I allowed myself those moments. I called my family. I listened to a song in my first language. But then I returned to English, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because by now it wasn't just a goal, it was my identity. I had built a world around me, a world that reflected who I was becoming: confident, curious, brave. A woman who had once whispered in grocery store lines, but now shared her story, cracked jokes, asked questions, and answered the phone without fear. English wasn't a separate version of me anymore. It was me, just another layer, another voice, a stronger one. And the truth is, I didn't need to live in New York or California to immerse myself. I created immersion in my own apartment, my own street, my own routines. I didn't have to spend thousands of dollars or move to another city. I built a new life inside my old one, just by changing the language I chose to live in. Looking back now, I can see the entire journey, how each step brought me closer to this freedom. First, I realized translation was holding me back. Then I started thinking in English. I learned to listen without subtitles and speak out loud without fear. And finally, I surrounded myself with English, not just as a practice, but as a lifestyle. But even with all that growth, there was still one more truth I needed to accept, maybe the most important one of all. It wasn't just about building an English world. It was about letting go of perfection and embracing the real me. Surrounding yourself with it, playing with it, making mistakes in it, laughing in it, dreaming in it. Watching shows without subtitles helped me build my listening skills. Shadowing helped me speak with confidence and rhythm. Together, they made English part of my identity. I stopped being scared of fast conversations. I stopped dreading phone calls. I stopped hesitating. But most importantly, I stopped translating. And once I could listen, think, and speak all in English, I wanted to go even further. I wanted to break free from the fear of mistakes, the pressure to sound perfect, and the belief that I had to get every word right. Because the truth is, real English isn't perfect. So next, I made a decision that changed everything. I stopped trying to be flawless and started aiming for real. After I started shadowing shows and learning to speak with the rhythm and tone of natural American English, I felt like I had finally entered a new stage. My ears were sharper. My tongue was quicker. Conversations at work felt easier. I was beginning to sound more natural, and even people around me noticed the change. But despite all that progress, there was still something holding me back. And I didn't realize it until I caught myself whispering again. It happened at the grocery store. I was in line, waiting to check out, and I saw the cashier wearing a shirt with the name of a local baseball team. I wanted to say something friendly, just to make a little small talk. "Hey, are you a Cubs fan?" But the second the thought formed, a voice in my head pushed back. What if you mess up? What if it sounds awkward? What if she doesn't understand you? So instead of speaking, I smiled and said nothing. That moment stuck with me the whole day. It frustrated me. I had been working so hard to think and listen in English. I was finally shadowing full conversations. But I still wasn't totally free because I was still afraid of making mistakes. And that fear was keeping my voice small. Later that evening, I sat on my couch, holding a cup of tea, and thought about everything I'd been doing. Practicing quietly, repeating after TV shows, writing in my journal, recording voice memos. It was all helpful, yes, but it was still safe. It was all private. I realized that what I needed to do next was let go of the fear of being wrong. I needed to stop worrying about sounding perfect and start using English the same way I use my native language, freely, openly, without hesitation. So I gave myself a new challenge. I would practice speaking out loud every day, but I wouldn't correct myself while speaking. No pausing, no self-judgment, no rewinding my sentences like a broken tape recorder. Just talk, even if it wasn't perfect. Even if I made 10 mistakes in one sentence. At first, I just spoke out loud to myself in my apartment. No pressure, no one listening. I'd look around and describe what I saw. There's a plant on the table. The light is coming through the window. I should water the plant. It looks a little dry. I would also talk myself through daily tasks. Okay, now I'm going to cook dinner. I'll need some olive oil. Let me grab the pan. I think I'll make chicken and rice tonight. The words weren't fancy. They didn't need to be. I wasn't trying to sound like a college professor. I just wanted to sound like myself. Then I started adding more emotion to my speaking. I talked about how I felt. Today was a rough day. I was tired at work, and I got frustrated with my coworker, but I handled it. I didn't snap. Or, I'm proud of myself. I answered the phone without getting nervous. I didn't even think about what to say. It just came out. These kinds of spoken thoughts helped me build confidence in expressing feelings, not just facts. The more I did it, the less I cared about mistakes. I started seeing them differently. Before, a mistake meant failure. Now, a mistake just meant I was learning. One day, I couldn't remember the word appointment, so I said, I have to go see the doctor at 2:00. I realized afterward that what I said still made sense. The message was clear. I didn't need the perfect word to communicate. That shift changed everything. I also began having fake conversations with myself, like little role plays. I'd pretend I was ordering coffee at a cafe. Hi, can I get a medium iced latte with almond milk? Or imagine a phone call. Hi, this is Melania. I was calling to ask about the interview schedule for next week. Sometimes I'd pretend I was meeting someone new at a party. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm originally from Europe, but I've been living in the US for a few years now. These imaginary situations helped me prepare for real ones. And because I wasn't correcting myself in the moment, I actually enjoyed it. It became a fun routine, like acting, but for language. But the biggest turning point came when I started talking to real people without overthinking. At work, instead of rehearsing every sentence in my head before I said it, I just opened my mouth and spoke. One day, a customer asked where the men's jackets were, and I almost paused. But then I smiled and said, Sure, they're in the back, past the shoes. Do you want me to show you? The words came naturally, not because I'd memorized them, but because I was finally allowing myself to speak without fear. I also stopped apologizing for my English. That was a hard habit to break. I used to say, sorry, my English isn't very good, even when it was totally fine. But I noticed that people never complained. They understood me just fine. So why was I apologizing? I started reminding myself, you live here, you work here, you talk to people every day, your English is real, you don't need to say sorry for learning. And once I stopped apologizing, I started owning my voice. One of my favorite things became recording daily thought journals. I'd take 5 minutes and talk about whatever was on my mind. Sometimes I'd talk about something I saw on the news. Other times I'd share a memory or an opinion. For example, I saw a story about a dog rescue this morning. It made me cry. I think animals are so pure, they deserve kindness. Or, I don't like cold weather, but I do love fall fashion. Sweaters, boots, scarves. I'm ready. Then I'd listen to the recordings later, not to judge myself, but to celebrate how much I could say without stopping. Sometimes I still made small grammar mistakes, but I didn't care because I was communicating clearly. My tone was strong. My message was clear. That's what mattered. I also began using English more in social media. When I posted something on Instagram or commented on someone's photo, I wrote in English. Not perfect, not academic, just natural. Looks amazing, or so proud of you, or I've been there, hang in there. It helped me feel connected to the world around me in a new way. But perhaps the biggest victory came one evening at a friend's birthday dinner. I was sitting at a long table in a noisy restaurant in downtown Chicago. Everyone was talking at once, laughing, telling stories, interrupting each other. Normally, I would have sat quietly, just nodding and smiling, maybe adding a word or two if someone asked me a direct question. But that night, I jumped in. Someone told a story about getting lost during a road trip in Michigan. I laughed and said, "That happened to me once." My GPS stopped working and I ended up in this tiny town with only one gas station. I asked for directions and the guy said, "Just go past the big cow and turn left." And guess what? There was a big cow. Everyone laughed. I felt seen. Not as the girl with the accent, but as a person with a voice and a sense of humor. It wasn't a perfect story. My grammar wasn't flawless, but no one cared. They were listening. They were connecting. That night, walking home under the streetlights, I thought to myself, this is what fluency feels like. Not perfection, not total accuracy, but presence, confidence, connection. From then on, I made it a rule. No more silencing myself. No more waiting until I felt ready to speak. I'd rather say something imperfect than say nothing at all. That new mindset opened doors. I started saying yes to more conversations. I joined a book club at the local library. I started volunteering at a food drive, helping people fill out forms. I even said yes to giving a short talk at work during team training. And each time I got a little better. Not because I studied more, but because I spoke more. I spoke when I was unsure. I spoke when I was tired. I spoke when I had to guess a word. And every time I reminded myself, mistakes are just signs that you're trying. English stopped being this thing I had to get right. It became part of my real life. And the more I used it, the more natural it felt. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to take things even further. I had practiced speaking out loud without fear. But now I wanted to surround myself completely with English. Not just in moments of practice, but all day, every day. I wanted English to become the air I breathed,